Hey, what's going on, guys? OJ back here with another video. Today, we're here to talk about legendary matchups that UFC needs to make before the end of the year. All right, now, it is no secret the UFC matchmakers have recently been fumbling a lot of super fights, such as Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria, Alexander Volkanovski versus anybody that's not named Diego Lopez, and Alex Pereira versus John Jones, just to name some of the more recent ones. That being said, though, I do think that there are still some banger matchups to be made before the end of this year. And if these matchups are made, I think that will save the UFC's popularity and actually drive some interest from the casual fans, because the matchups I'm going to talk about are legendary to say the least. All right, so in a couple of seconds, I'm gonna give you guys a bunch of Hall of Fame matchups that we as hardcore UFC fans will all appreciate. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video. I need to see Anshul Jubli versus Shem before the end of 2026. All right. While the iron is hot, the UFC needs to book this matchup. It is no secret that Shem does not like Anshul Jubli because of his race. And I feel like this is a great way for Anshul Jubli to return to the sport. Now, I understand that he has been redeemed by Pakistan's greatest warrior and Mike Breeden. But this is a chance for Anshul Jubli to get a little bit of a redemption arc. And I feel like this is the perfect opponent for Anshul Jubli, not just in terms of the animosity, but also in terms of skill level, because I do think that these fighters here, they're skill for skill, they're pretty even. So it would kind of be a pick and fight. And no matter who wins, we're going to get peak entertainment. Will Shamrock send Anshul Jubli back to the Microsoft call centers? Or will MMA Guru go on a generational rant as he watches one of his favorite fighters lose to Anshul Jubli? Either way, we're getting peak content, so we need to see Anshul Jubli versus Shamrock while both of these guys are still on the roster. It would be a darn shame if both of these guys get fed to another prospect when we could have had them fight each other and put on a legendary performance for all of the UFC fans to enjoy. So I would love to see Anshul Jubli versus Shamrock before the end of the year. Now, it's unfortunate that both of these guys have been cut from the UFC. They have both went on legendary runs in their own right. But what happens when you put a punching bag next to a victim? You never think of this before, because usually you just say, oh, Jose Medina is going to lose, or, oh, Antonio Trocoli is going to get victimized. But what happens when you put them against each other? Right? I feel like these are the questions we need to ask ourselves as hardcore UFC fans. Like, will Jose Daniel Medina actually be able to impose his will other than just plodding forward and not doing anything other than getting his ass beat? Or will Antonio Trocoli finally get a win in the UFC after looking like complete dog shit for the first two rounds of a fight? Like, these are the things that we need to ask ourselves, all right? Because although both of them have been victimized multiple times in their separate careers, when we put these guys in the cage together, who knows who will win, all right? Because both of these guys have yet to show any capabilities in terms of producing high-level fights. So I want to see Jose Daniel Medina versus Antonio Trocoli. This will be a generational banger in the middleweight division. Put this in the main card of an Apex fight night. Like, I would actually be invested in this fight, and I would actually do tape study to see whether or not Jose Daniel Medina or Antonio Trocoli can finally get a win in the UFC. Again, it is a darn shame that both of these guys have been cut. They are true legends of the sport. But I feel like the UFC should bring them back, and the UFC should bring them back and have them fight each other, and the winner can stay in the UFC getting victimized by future prospects up in the middleweight division. A lot of people might say that Rafael Cerqueira is the worst lightweight to ever be signed on the UFC roster. But people forget, before we had Rafael Cerqueira, we had Anton Turkalj, the pleasure man himself. Like, these guys are pretty even when it comes to their UFC career results. Both of these guys went 0-4. They both been victimized by Ivo Aslan, and they have not really displayed all that much skill across their 4 fights in the UFC. But what happens when you put them up against each other, right? This is a legitimate matchup where I could see either of these guys winning. But to be fair, though, Rafael Cerqueira has been victimized by everybody within 30 seconds. That being said, though, Anton Turkalj, although he has also lost 4 fights in a row, he has survived until the 3rd round against Ivo Aslan, right? But MMA math doesn't always work. Anton Turkalj might get knocked out by Rafael Cerqueira because Anton Turkalj gets knocked out by everybody. But at the same time, though, I do feel like Rafael Cerqueira versus Anton Turkalj would be a legendary fight to make. It's unfortunate, though, that both of these guys have been cut from the UFC roster. But again, I do feel like that both of these guys should be signed back because we have Darius Flowers on the UFC Apex this weekend. Like, you're telling me we can't bring Anton Turkalj or Rafael Cerqueira back, but we can have Darius Flowers on the roster? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I would love to see Rafael Cerqueira and Anton Turkalj fight each other, and the winner gets to keep their job in the UFC. Now, moving on, we got Saimon Oliveira versus Kris Moutinho. I know that Kris Moutinho got cut from the UFC roster after he lost to Christian Quinones. That being said, though, I don't agree with cutting Kris Moutinho. Like, yes, he has not won a fight in the UFC, and he is not all that skilled. But Saimon Oliveira is still on the roster. Like, how are you cutting Kris Moutinho, but not Saimon Oliveira? At least the fans know who Kris Moutinho is and appreciate him. Like, I don't even know how Saimon Oliveira still has a job. Like, the guy has been victimized across every single one of his fights. So, I want to see Kris Moutinho finally get a dub in the UFC. Maybe not, though. He has not won a fight in the UFC, like, ever. So, like, maybe he's just complete garbage. But that being said, though, I feel like this is one of the more approachable matchups for Kris Moutinho. Saimon Oliveira, he is also kind of dog shit, except for the fact that Oliveira gets victimized in the 1st round or 2nd round on a daily basis. So I want to see this fight. Maybe Kris Moutinho finally gets a dub in the UFC. But either way, I think this is a very competitive fight that can fill up a slot in the prelims of a regular fight night. I do think that this should be a fight, though. Like, I feel like Saimon Oliveira, I don't have any fun watching him get killed by any prospect because, like, again, it's like everyone's done it. So what would him getting slammed out one more time make any difference to us fans? Right? I feel like this would be a very competitive fight. So for that reason, I want to see Kris Moutinho get signed back onto the UFC roster one more time, and let's have Kris Moutinho fight Saimon Oliveira. Last but not least, we got Austen Lane versus Lukasz Brzeski. Now, I know that Lukasz Brzeski got cut from the UFC roster, but hear me out. Austen Lane's still here. Austen Lane is 1-5 in the UFC, and that's basically the same record as Lukasz Brzeski. Like, we're cutting Lukasz Brzeski after going 1-5. And keep in mind, he did beat a very good fighter in Walter Walker. But not Austen Lane. Austen Lane, on the other hand, he's been slimed out on a regular basis. His only win in the UFC was against Robelis Despain. But he gets to stay on the roster because he was a former NFL player. I just don't think that's fair. If the UFC is that desperate to keep Austen Lane on the roster, I feel like this would be a very approachable matchup for Austen Lane. Because Lukasz Brzeski, outside of when he fought Walter Walker, he's just been known for getting victimized on a regular basis. And I feel like Austen Lane versus Lukasz Brzeski would be a legitimately competitive fight. And I know that the UFC want to keep Austen Lane on the roster because he's a former NFL player. So let's have Austen Lane fight Lukasz Brzeski. Please sign Lukasz Brzeski back onto the UFC roster. We need more heavyweights on deck. And I feel like this would be a perfect fight for Austen Lane to finally get a dub once more in the UFC. Alright, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys want to see more videos like this, please make sure to like and subscribe so we can monetize this channel. But leave a comment down below what other matchups you guys would love to see. Alright, because me personally, I do think that these matchups, they're going to be legendary. Every hardcore fan will appreciate this. And this is a perfect way for the casual fans to be introduced to the legends of the sport. Alright, but other than that though, leave any comments down below for other video suggestions you have for me. But otherwise though, I will see you guys next time. Peace.